National Resource Center for the First Year Experience and Students in Transition. We are based at the University of South Carolina. We were founded in 1986. Our initial focus was on the transition from high school into college and what happened to students during their first year. And we've since expanded our focus. We look at sophomore issues, we look at transfer issues, and we also look at the senior year experience, what's happening to students in their last year of college and as they transition out. And so today, I'm going to present to you some data from a survey we did in the spring on senior capstone experiences. I will say we intentionally included some community colleges in the call. So we do have some data for community college responses to culminating experiences that community colleges are offering. And I think this is an important thing to sort of look at to sort of understand what kind of springboard experiences they might be having that could be preparing them for transfer to your institution. And we'll also look at the four-year data and then have some kind of conversation about transfer participation in these programs and what might be obstacles and how might we overcome those obstacles. So just to kind of talk a little bit about this idea of the senior capstone. I'm assuming many of you are familiar with high impact practices. This is the senior capstone or culminating experience is one of 10 of those practices. And AAC&U has suggested that they engage students in a range of important experiences that contribute to these learning outcomes that we have said are important for higher education and for movement into the workforce. So things like knowledge of human cultures and the physical and natural world. And this isn't just about content knowledge. This is about the ability to sort of explore enduring and challenging questions related to those fields. Intellectual and practical skills, these are the kinds of things that employers really tell us they're interested in. Things like inquiry and analysis, critical and creative thinking, written and oral communication, quantitative literacy, information literacy, teamwork, problem solving. Personal and social responsibility are another set of outcomes related to participation in high impact practices. And then finally, this idea of integrative learning, the ability to be able to apply knowledge to different areas of studies and to more complex problems. So what is a senior capstone experience? We've got two definitions here, one from Koo and one from John Gardner and Associates. And the impetus for senior capstones really comes out of the 1980s and this emphasis on reforming undergraduate education. As they looked at the experience students were having, they said, well, it's really fragmented because they come in, they have this sort of gen ed curriculum, and then they go into a discipline, and there's no connection between these sort of two halves of their college experience. And I was thinking last night as I was reviewing my notes, well, how much more fragmented is the experience for college students today? I'm thinking about the panelists who had attended 7 community colleges before transferring to a 4-year institution. And how do you integrate or help students integrate that kind of vast variety of learning experiences? They were just thinking about the traditional student who started at one institution and finished at one institution. So I think the need for these kind of experiences that help students integrate their learning across all of their learning opportunities are more important now than ever before. So one goal of the senior capstone is to sort of help people integrate and synthesize the learning they've had in college and maybe to apply that. And then the second sort of goal that Gardner kind of touches on is laying the groundwork for transition into the workforce, for further education such as graduate work, and civic engagement, so being involved in the public sphere. And so there are a range of different experiences that qualify as senior capstones. I think initially when they were talking about this in the 80s, they envisioned a course that students might take. But students could be involved in a course, they might be involved in internships or other practical experiences like teaching. So internships are common mostly in business and in teaching fields. Comprehensive exams or licensing exams are also fall under this umbrella of culminating experiences. Portfolios, and that might be putting together artifacts of their work within a major, or it might be the entire curriculum they've experienced it. In the fine arts, we're more likely to see performances, so things like a senior recital, an art show, those sorts of things. And then finally, students might be engaged in independent research, be required to write a thesis, that sort of thing. So what do we know about participation? This is some data that Koo presented in 2008, and we'll see some more recent findings related to this as well. The senior capstone is the last line there. So students who had exposure to a senior capstone, and I think it's worded like, did you have a senior capstone experience? So things like internships, students might not identify in that way, but if they had some kind of culminating experience, they said they felt like they were more engaged in their learning, that they gained in their knowledge of general education, so it did help with that synthesizing of the experience for them. They gained in personal and social development, and then practical competence. So those are those skills that might be valuable for employers. So as I said, what I want to look at today are 4 questions. So how are capstone experiences organized in 2-year institutions, and how might those prepare students for transfer? What's the prevalence and structure of capstones in 4-year institutions? What do we know about the participation of transfer students in these experiences? And then finally, just kind of an open discussion of what do we think are some of the obstacles for participation at our institutions, and how we might remove some of those obstacles and engage transfers in this experience. So the National Survey of Senior Capstone Experiences was conducted last spring. This is the 3rd time that we have administered this survey. We did one in 1999, and then we did another one in 2011, so there's a big gap between the first 2 administrations. One of the things in the 2011 administration, we had some 2-year colleges. We didn't intentionally seek out 2-year colleges, but we had some of them respond to the survey anyway, which is kind of interesting. Like, oh, well, you're thinking about culminating experiences for your students. So this time around, we intentionally sought out 2-year colleges to participate in this survey. We also intentionally sought out institutions who had completed our survey of first-year seminars and our survey on sophomore initiatives, because our goal is eventually to be able to look at sort of a sample of institutions to see how they are supporting students throughout their college experience. So we'll be able to say some things about what's happening throughout the college experience eventually. So we had 389 who had completed those 2 surveys, and we sent it out to just over 3,100 other institutions that offer undergraduate degrees in the United States. We do 3 waves of administration, so we start by sending it to the Chief Academic Officer, and it's an invitation that says, send this to the person who's best able to talk about senior capstones on your campus. And we'll talk about why that's challenging in just a minute. But when we don't hear from the Chief Academic Officer or get a response, we then send it out to the Chief Executive Officer or the President, and then it goes to the Chief Student Affairs Officer. We use Baseline, which is a web-based survey platform out of Campus Lab. Some of you may use that on your own campuses. And we have a relatively small response rate for this survey. We had 11% response rate. And part of that is because, as we'll look at the data, senior capstone experiences are widely dispersed throughout the institution, and so it's hard to identify the one person on campus who can respond to a survey like this. So a little bit about our sample. In terms of comparison with the national averages, 2-year colleges are underrepresented in this, and 4-year colleges are overrepresented. I think it's because we call it the senior capstone experience, and 2-year colleges, even though we intentionally included them, will say we don't have seniors, so this is not for us. Our representation of public and private is a little bit higher than what's in the national sample, but they're pretty evenly distributed in our survey sample. The survey itself, I don't know that I mentioned this, asks about the kinds of capstone experiences offered, where those experiences are housed on campus, and then we ask about experiences that are campus-wide. And when we go to those, because we assume we can make some more generalizations if it's offered to all students on the campus, we ask things like, what are the goals, what are the chief topics that are there, and then we look at some of the course components that might be associated with those campus-wide experiences. So before we start looking at two-year colleges, I wanted to see, do we have any folks from two-year campuses here? One, okay, great. Do you know whether you have any kind of culminating experience on your campus for your students?
As far as I know, we do not.
Okay.
Of course, I've been in this position for about maybe 6 months. But,
Okay.
But to my knowledge, I don't believe we do.
Okay. So this is also sort of interesting because we did have some of these people responding saying, well, I have no idea what we're doing related to capstone experiences on our campus. So that's sort of interesting as well. But just, we asked campuses where they are housed. And so this is the two-year data. And our sample is really small for two-year institutions. It was just 57 institutions. And of those, not quite 2/3 said that they offered some kind of capstone. So you can see we're really getting small now. When we asked people why they didn't have a capstone, slightly more than half said that they, it wasn't an institutional priority. And then when I looked at sort of other responses, it seemed like they didn't see this as fitting into the definition of their mission. So we'll look at some other surveys that might suggest otherwise, that there are ways that campus, two-year colleges might be engaging culminating experiences and they're not defining it as such, or maybe they could be sort of reframing some of the things they're doing. So about half of them are embedded in individual departments or disciplines, and then another 40% tell us that they also have capstone experiences in individual programs. These might be co-curricular programs. 14% say they have campus-wide. So one of the things that this tells you right away is, well, this doesn't add up to 100. What does that mean? It means that campuses offer multiple culminating experiences to their students. And this, again, kind of is the challenge when you're trying to collect data on something like this. And it also tells us that institutional responsibility for these kind of experiences is widely dispersed. And this is not any different from what we'll see when we look at four-year data. So the kinds of capstone experiences that they offer, we asked two different questions here. We asked, the discrete type represents all the different types of capstone experiences that a two-year institution might offer, and the most prominent is the one that serves the highest percentage of students on their campus. So capstone courses are pretty high, internships, certificate or licensing exams, and then comprehensive exams. So sort of given some of the dual purpose of most community colleges, this is sort of not surprising. Let's see if I had anything else interesting to share there. When we talk about what are the primary objectives for the course, we did ask, was transfer preparation an important objective for community colleges? And not one institution said that that was one of their primary objectives for a culminating experience. But when we look at some of the things that they did say were important, things like critical thinking, academic skills, inquiry-based skills, all of those would suggest an interest in preparing students to move on to additional education. But we also see some objectives that focus more on sort of the vocational preparation that's a mission for many two-year campuses. So things like the professional certification really point to that, as might the applied learning experiences. All right, so I suggest we don't have a lot of, I guess let me go back to this very quickly. When we ask like this, these are the ones that are most prominent among our two-year responses. And let me tell you a little bit about what they told us about how many of their students are participating. So fewer than 20, about 42% told us that fewer than 20% of their students participated in a capstone course. That's their most prominent thing. So we have a small number offering it, and even of those who are offering it, only a small number, are touching their students with this course. So it's not widely dispersed in the curriculum at two-year colleges. So I wanted to see, well, is this happening and we just aren't capturing it on our survey because we have such a small sample? So I looked at a couple of other national surveys of practices at two-year campuses. And the first is the National Survey of Student Success Initiatives that was conducted by the John Gardner Institute on Excellence in Undergraduate Education. And service learning, that was one of the things that might be a culminating experience. And what they found was that slightly more than half of their institutions, 55%, provide service learning for students in the community college. It's about evenly split between first and second year, so it might not be a culminating experience, so to speak. But the numbers are really small. So 12% or 12.6% of first-year students were participating in service learning, and just 13.2% of second-year students were participating in service learning. The other thing that the Gardner Institute asked about that is kind of a correlate of a culminating experience when we look at how those are defined might be research, and these are student-faculty research experiences. And they defined it specifically as an opportunity for students and faculty to work collaboratively on research topics or to generate scholarship. 23% said that this was an opportunity they offered to students, but only 5.3% of students were participating in that. So again, very small participation. It's much more common at large to mid-sized community colleges than at smaller ones. The other survey I looked at was the Community College Survey of Student Engagement. And they kind of pull a lot of these, what we might think of as correlates of capstone experiences, under the heading of experiential learning. So things like internships and co-op experiences, being out in the field, doing clinical assignments or community-based projects. What they identify as experiential learning. Their survey is a little different, whereas the Gardner Institute was looking at institutional structures. The Community College Survey of Student Engagement is actually a student-level survey. So 77% of the respondents hadn't participated in any of those experiences, but 45% said they planned to. So that's somewhat encouraging. Students are saying, yeah, these are things I want to do. These experiential learning activities were more likely to be required for students who were in kind of vocational or technical tracks. So if they were in an applied associate's program, it might be more likely to be required than if they're in a straight associate's program. So that's something that might be, if you're working with, community college partners, to think about, well, these are things you might want to think about bringing in and requiring for your students. Because what they found is that there are some important outcomes related to having these experiences. So students are saying that they are engaging more in active and collaborative learning. They feel that they have more academic challenge, they have more faculty interaction, and we know all of those things are good for students. They also found that developmental ed students who had participated or planned to participate in experiential learning were more successful in completing gatekeeper math courses. So if you're thinking about what's going to help my students once they get to my campus, having had those kind of experiences might be really important for them. All right, so let's talk a little bit about four-year colleges and universities. So most of you, when I asked, there was only one community college rep. How many of you know what kind of culminating experiences or capstone experiences you have on your campus? What kind of experiences do you have?
Most of our students in their departments have to do a senior seminar.
Okay, so
research project.
A senior seminar, is the project connected to the course?
The project is the course.
Okay, they do the project as part of the course.
It's a standalone semester-long research class.
Okay. Other capstone experiences? About the same? Okay.
Ours is the same too for STEM.
Okay.
And then it just breaks down by department. So our department has a portfolio, has a senior capstone project.
Okay, so it really is,
depends on the
department.
Yeah, depends on the department, college. Some do undergraduate research, some do internships.
Okay.
And they kind of internship as they go along.
Okay.
Document that and then come back and actually present on their internship experience.
Okay, so some reflection that goes on, gets connected to an internship, okay. So one of the things that we asked are, what are the key objectives for the senior year? This is not why people offer a capstone experience, but it's what they're hoping for their seniors. And this is sort of interesting because if you think about the top 4 things that people are saying, this is what we want to get for our seniors, these are the things we get measured on as institutions. Like, what are our graduation rates? Have we prepared students to enter the workforce? Did they get good jobs? The last one is sort of focused on, what can our students do when they leave? And so I think this is sort of interesting in terms of what are our priorities when we think about our students. So again, we see this range of capstone experiences. It's just like you were saying in terms of it gets dispersed based on where things are happening. So we asked where they're housed. Almost 100% said they had some capstone experiences housed in individual academic departments or disciplines. And capstone courses are the most common within those individual academic departments. But when you break it down by major, you see some shifting. So for example, capstone courses and thesis requirements are pretty high up in arts and sciences and in social sciences, but when you get into business, internships become higher ranking. Projects rank a little bit higher for the sciences and for mathematics. We also see that about half of our respondents said that they have senior capstone experiences in co-curricular places on the campus. So things like the honors program, a leadership program, a service learning or campus engagement office. They might be doing things out of the Career Center. And again, we ask what kinds of things are they doing in connection with these locales. In honors, they're doing capstone courses or they're doing a thesis. Leadership and service learning, they're doing service learning experiences in those 2 areas. And Career Center, they're focusing on internships primarily. And then finally, about 40%, not quite 40%, tell us that they have campus-wide initiatives. So this is something that would be open to any senior, regardless of major. And so again, we see that same kind of thing, is that there's wide dispersal throughout the institution with capstones. And you can begin to imagine the difficulty of sort of pushing students in and tracking them through those kind of experiences. So one of the things that we did to drill down a little bit more is for the campus-wide capstones, we asked a few additional questions because we felt like this is the only one where we can make some generalizations because they're offered for all students on the campus. And so again, we asked these 2 questions, like what are the ones that you offer most frequently and what are the ones that serve the highest number of students on your campus? And so the ones that serve the highest number of students are some kind of a gen ed capstone. So this might be one that really asks students to sort of integrate and synthesize the general education curriculum and tie in whatever they've learned in their major to that gen ed curriculum. There might be some other type of capstone course students are engaged in. Senior thesis and then other activities are also serving a lot of students. We also asked, well, what are the primary objectives for this campus-wide capstone, the one that's serving the most on your campus? And here we begin to see the things that we really want students to get out. It's different from that first list of objectives that I showed you. So critical thinking skills, the ability to integrate and apply learning, some academic skills, particularly I guess if the goal is to transfer, or not transfer, but promote students to professional school, career preparation, and then writing skills are real. A lot of senior capstone experiences are very writing intensive. Of these, nearly 60% of those offering a campus-wide capstone say that between 90 and 100% of their seniors participate. So, the 2-year colleges, we weren't seeing a lot of participation in culminating experiences, but we're seeing a lot of participation at 4-year campuses. And remember, this is just that you know, 37.8% that offered campus-wide. So you've also still got all of those departmental and program level capstones that are happening. So students, in theory, may be experiencing multiple, you know, senior capstones on their campus. They're administered primarily in academic units within either the broader academic affairs division or departments or in college and schools. This is just sort of, how are they administered? So slightly more than 40% say they have an administrator for the campus-wide capstone. But 78% of those administrators are part-time. They have another role on the campus, which is probably not surprising given the way most of our jobs work. They're like, could you just do this other thing as well? And about 2/3 of the role for those administrators are also faculty members. But then we also have a fair number of academic affairs administrators. So let's talk about transfers in relation to these experiences. Does anybody have any sense of how your transfers are engaged in capstones on your campus? Do you have any idea about the rate of participation in these experiences?
I can only speak from my own experience as a transfer student. Mine was just an undergrad research experience for my degree.
Okay.
Just doing, picking out a project and going from there. So
Okay.
I was fortunate enough to already be involved on campus and using that experience as an opportunity to do research for the department I was working with.
Okay. So was it a formal program that was required for your?
It was required for our capstone.
Okay.
I'm a communication major, so
Okay.
our communication capstone was to pick a department and see what type of media or participation they were having. I was working for our student alumni, or for our alumni department. So of the different media forums that they offered, how many of the alumni were already using those services and things that they felt like they could improve upon, things like that. So it really didn't separate me from being a transfer student versus somebody who, you know, for first time full-time freshman getting ready to graduate.
Okay.
So this was part of our experience with the transfer student.
All right, so that's great. We hope that every transfer student is experiencing just like that. But we'll look at those data in just a minute to see what we can figure out. Okay, so first let's talk about why these are important to transfer students and really to all of our students. Finley and McNair did a report using some NESE data. This was published by AAC&U, and they took all of the deep learning and the gain scales from the NESE, and they created a 100-point scale. And so they looked at all of the different high-impact practices that NESE asked about. And anybody who had a senior capstone had 6.1 points higher on that scale than folks who didn't participate. Some of the other things that might be senior capstone or culminating experiences, but students might not have named them as such, like participation in internships. There's a 5.2 point gain. Faculty research projects, 8.1 gain. Service learning, 8.5 gain. So there's a real value to students to participating in these kinds of experiences. They also found a measurable, significant, and positive relationship between students' cumulative participation in multiple high-impact practices and their perceived engagement in deep learning and their perceived gains in learning. So, for example, they looked at first gen as well, but transfer students compared to, they're compared to other transfer students who did not participate. So you can see the red bar is those who participated in 1 to 2 high-impact practices in their experience at the college. And they have a 14% gain compared to transfer students who didn't participate. and it just keeps jumping up as we add more high-impact practices. So there's a cumulative benefit for transfer students when they have exposure to these things. But you might say, well, what is that? How does that compare to the first time in college? And this is, I apologize, this one's really hard to see. But if you look at sort of the deep learning gains and also personal and social development, the gap between transfers and full-time first years decreases as they have more experiences. So it closes the gap. You know, people are talking about, well, our transfers, you know, how well are our transfer students doing compared to our native students? This is some research that would say, well, this is why it's important, because we can close the gap in some of these outcomes by exposing them to high-impact practices. But you know, how many high-impact practices do transfer students participate in? So I had the folks at NESE pull the most recent data for me on high-impact practice. And so the blue bar is transfer student, and the red bar is non-transfer, so folks who started at that institution. And you can see that they, with the exception of service learning, where there's a pretty close connection, transfer students aren't engaging in the high-impact practices to the same extent as the native or first-time in college students. And particularly when we look at the senior capstones, there's a pretty significant gap in that particular one. So I really, we have a good bit of time left. I really just thought we would spend some time talking about what do you think this means for your campus? Like, why would there be the gap in participation? So Chris says, well, I got routed right into it because it was a requirement for my major. Why might there be the gap between, you know, transfers and non-transfers in these senior capstones on your campus? Where do you think the obstacles for participation might be?
Being a transfer student in general, I mean, the panel, you know, yesterday really talked about, really hit home with that, you know, whole sense of belonging. And I think that might actually contribute to, maybe not a significant portion, but a part of it, having that, you know, just transferring here because it took the most amount of my credits. It may or may not be part of the curriculum, but it's enough to satisfy whatever needs to be satisfied to you know, graduate, get out of here, and move on to the next phase of life.
Okay. So the students, because of their motivation for being at that institution, might not be seeking out those kinds of experiences. Other campuses, what do you anticipate might be obstacles? Sure. Yes.
So I kind of overgeneralized earlier when I said that every student does a senior research project. It's only in arts and sciences. I don't know what happens in the other colleges.
Okay.
But I think, at least the departments I'm most familiar with, students can do their senior seminar research project either in their junior year or their senior year. But if you're a transfer student, you're behind on catching up with those classes you have to take anyway. So they might defer and not take it until their last semester of their senior year. Whereas native students might have the opportunity to take it earlier and get it out of the way. And thus have more room for failure and learning.
Yeah, and I'd have to ask how they pulled this data, because the way the NESE asked the question is, have you participated in it or do you plan to participate in it? And so when they sent me the data, it was just like yes and no. My guess is they've collapsed the I have done it or I plan to do it. So even if they took the NESE in the spring or in the fall, hopefully it captured the people who, like you're saying, well, I'm going to take it in my last semester. So, but that's a good question, and I should clarify with them what these data are telling us. Yes?
I think just in general, as a transfer myself and a recent graduate, I think I did participate in a voluntary research experience. Part of it is with the incentive to, I was paid for my research, to do my research, so there was that, but also in terms of the professional experience. It was an educator's It was an education research group, so to speak. So there was that, but then also the idea as a transfer, as you were mentioning, you do feel like you're behind. You do feel like you have all of these requirements and you have to do them in such an amount of time. And there's so much to do, especially if you're at a larger campus. You want to get involved. You want to do all of these things. And it's like, that's just on the bottom. Another class is on the bottom of the totem pole. You're like, I don't have to do it. I'm not going to do it. There's so many other priorities, especially with transfers who may have families, who may have work, full-time jobs, those sorts of things. So
if it's not part of the curriculum and it's not a required part of the curriculum, they are unlikely to do it.
Yeah.
As long as they're probably the demographic of the transfer student. If it's a traditional transfer, it's still in that 18 to 24 range, more than likely they're going to participate because there's still a lot of incentive, as you mentioned, to participate, whereas non-traditional or adult learner got other priorities, not really involved in this capstone, especially if it involves some kind of field experience, experiential learning experience that is going to take away from other priorities. So, looking at the demographic of the transfer student is something that probably needs to be considered.
Yes.
I'd just be curious to know, because I think when we talk about senior capstones, like how are we really defining it?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say this is because I know a lot of transfer students, work and have multiple jobs, and so a lot of times those jobs can replace some of their capstone experiences.
If you are flexible in sort of like how you allow them, like if they're required to do an internship and you allow them to take their current work as credit for the internship, I mean, and I think that's, my second question is, well, how do we engage, because we've got, pretty low participation, how do we engage them so that we are closing the gap in participation in these things? So one idea of being more flexible in terms of if you're requiring internship experiences and students are working in a related area, allowing them to count that experience. And particularly, I think there's been a lot written about sort of requiring students to take unpaid internships, and I mean, for students who are older and with a family, that is just and for most of our students, they're working their way through college, so it's really not possible to take an unpaid internship and still pay for college. And then I think courses, something that students have to show up for, might be easier for them to work into their schedule. But if you're requiring field experience, are there options that students can, choose? Like, can I choose to write a thesis as opposed to doing a field experience that's going to take me, out and add, 15 hours a week to my schedule in this semester? So I don't know how flexible institutions are in the kinds of things that they allow students to do in fulfilling those kind of requirements. Other obstacles that you envision for your students within this? Yes?
Not related so much to senior capstones, but other high impact practices. The one about service learning. So we do, my university, we do a whole week of service trips during spring break, and they actually give us a 2-week spring break for that reason. And one of the senior trips, or one of the service trips, is actually only for freshmen. And so I could almost see some of those high impact practices being targeted at native freshmen, and so then those students get in the habit of doing things like that. And so then if you come in and miss the entire first year experience, you're less likely to even know what the opportunities are.
Well, I remember that at the community colleges on our survey, it was on the Gardner survey, 55% of them said that they offered service learning. So if they're coming, and that's presuming that they spend enough time at any one institution to have been exposed to that, and only 12 to 13% were getting the service learning. So they also didn't get it before they came to you. So it's not just that they missed it at your institution. They may not have had that exposure at any institution. And so that's almost why it becomes even more imperative to make sure when they get to your institution that you somehow tie them in with a high impact practice, because they probably have missed it educational experience. And one of the things that I think this is sort of the lofty goal of high impact practices, that students have at least 1 to 2 in the first 2 years of their educational experience, and another 1 to 2 in, toward the end of the experience. And so, making sure that at least if they're at your 4-year institution, that you're providing that, that you're following up on that. Other, I guess, questions about the study that we did, or some of the, I feel like I went very quickly because I wanted to make sure we had time to sort of talk about this in relation to transfer students and their participation. All right, well, unless you have other comments or questions, I think this is my data for today. I will leave you with my contact information if you want to be in touch with me. I can put you in contact with my colleagues who sort of wrote the survey and did the administrative data analysis if there are other questions that you have. But thank you.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
Yes.
Great.